Evolution of a Nobody, Chapters 1 and 2, When Fiction Breaks In. Chapter 1. "Your father's dead! Your father's dead! Your father's dead!" The voices carried on behind Albert in a constant loop. "Miss your daddy? Miss your daddy? Miss your daddy?" But no outward tears stung Albert's brown eyes. His tears remained within for now. The sound of feet padding after him as he walked back to his apartment was a constant, and his lean arms screamed at him to cover his ears and lower his head to hide from the taunts. His legs screamed at him to run. Every fiber of his being commanded him, "Get away!" But he didn't. He walked on. The feet behind him were like a constant drumming, leaving him with no hope that it would stop. "Just tolerate it for now. You'll reach your place soon, and they'll keep going on to theirs just like they always do," he told himself, knowing he was right. Behind him he knew every voice and face without looking. 6 of them. Some had been friends once, when he and they were small and in elementary school. Now in high school they were anything but. The sun shone down indifferently, casting his shadow behind him. Occasionally the sound of sneakered feet ceased to step and became the sound of 2 feet landing. They were jumping on his shadow, putting it beneath them, a mockery of their childhood games. Still, Albert said nothing when their laughter came on. "Don't mind the bullies. They'll get bored and leave you alone. Just be nice. Just tell your teachers. Just. His mother's admonition rang in his ear. She was wrong. They didn't get bored. This was their entertainment on the way back to their homes. They did it because they were bored and because they wanted to, and because many figured he deserved it. His sandy hair hung loose and helped hold the heat in close to his head, but it didn't burn as much as bad advice that he couldn't bring himself to reject, even though he knew he should if he wanted things to stop. Teachers are worthless. He cursed their inaction, even though part of him understood it. Easier not to get involved. They're like the other students. The pitying looks are all over the place, but nobody does anything. In spite of Albert's own resolve to show nothing to anyone, he wrapped his arms in front of his empty stomach and tried to ignore the growl there. He grabbed the dark straps of his backpack and hiked it up higher, pretending he wasn't hugging himself. "Show no weakness," he said to himself again and again, and finally he reached his safe space. Ahead was the path that led to the complex where he lived. It was a simple set of interconnected gray-painted apartments, wooden structures with a plaster and mesh surface covered over with seashells. Every time he looked at it, he remembered his lessons in science class. Millions of years ago, all this was underwater. That's why you find shells so far from water today. Albert enjoyed those lessons. It made the present seem so small to think on time scales like that. In an eye blink, this life will be over, and none of them can do anything to me then. Even he was aware of how depressing the thought was, but it wasn't death he thought of, but his high school life. Behind him, he could hear the voices calling him, "See you tomorrow, Albie! See you, Shadow Boy! Later, bitch!" The taunts and jeers faded as the 6 of them began to talk of other things and as they made their way onto their own homes. He took out his key and unlocked the door. A simple 2-bedroom apartment greeted him. A kitchenette to his left with a stove, microwave, and refrigerator. A living room with a table and television, a sliding glass door that led out to the public pool he didn't dare use. "Mom, I'm home?" Albert's voice cracked a little. No answer came. "She must be out," he thought. "Good," he added and went to his room. Tears burned hot inside his body, but he couldn't bring himself to let them out. He tossed his bag onto the single bed and turned on his own television, and the game system along with it. He didn't need to select a game from the cases beside it, though there were several. There was only one choice. "Hilarum, here I come!" he said in the cracked voice of a boy nearing adulthood. He slid down from the bed to the floor and synced up the smooth black plastic controller to the console. The green logo flashed across the screen. He selected the CD tray to load from and began. Hilarum was the largest and most popular open-world game on the market. Doubly impressive because it had been around for years. Sequels had appeared, but Albert had no interest in them. They were MMOs, massive multiplayer online games. "I don't want to play with other people. Other people suck. I want my own story, not to be part of theirs." He let out a shudder and selected his character, Cammy. Cammy was as far from himself as possible, a tiger man with ripped muscles, powerful jaws, and most differently of all, maximum charisma. He had the same character for a very long time, and had maxed out stats to the point where the quests were not a challenge on even the highest difficulty level. That was the point. That was the fun. Here, I am a god. Thanks to his programming and editing skills and a dev kit-loaded console which cost a bundle to get, he could create his own mods and then install them. The 3D models were a bit pricey, but a side job got him the money to pay for models, so the game never got old. And in this way, Albert ensured he didn't need anybody. He let out a sigh and tapped his foot on the soft cream carpet that had begun to fade with age and imperfect cleaning. The new mod was ready, and it was time to play the story he himself had written. Time to lead the rebellion and destroy the 6 evil overlords, he grinned. Even if it does have a long load time. He chuckled a bit at the joke that even he knew wasn't really funny, and popped up to go get a soda. The promise of the fun ahead made him impatient, but pushed aside the misery of only minutes before. The off-white refrigerator door resisted his pull for just a moment, then gave in with the crisp crack it always did, and Albert's eyes searched the shelves. There wasn't much, lots of condiments, most of those half-empty, some fruit that wasn't going to last much longer if it wasn't eaten. His eyes fell to what he wanted, beast a can with a single claw through the name, an energy drink that didn't work well because it had no sugar. But he liked the flavor, and it was cheap. He snatched the black and blue can and popped the top. Just as the audible crack and fizz began, he heard something unexpected. "What the hell?" he heard a woman's voice utter. "What in heaven's name?" another equally feminine voice gasped out. Albert froze. "That came from my room," he recognized and looked toward the split in the hall between his mother's room and his. He turned his eyes toward the door to the outside. "Run, get a neighbor to call the cops. Get help." He told himself, but he didn't move. He stood frozen and listened. "Where are we?" the first woman asked, a hint of fear in her voice. "How should I know?" "I did the same thing you did," he heard the second voice retort. That gave him pause. They sound confused, not criminal, and I have no window there large enough for them to get in through. So where did they come from? He asked himself. He wondered briefly if they'd been hiding in the bathroom, but dismissed the idea as unlikely. They sounded afraid, too. If I call the cops, they'll get in trouble, and they sound distressed already. Mom will think they're burglars. And if this is just some big misunderstanding, fuck! Albert cursed as he realized he was talking himself into going in there. He set his 16-ounce can down quietly on the counter, then reached into the pantry, moving with great care when opening the door so as to not make a sound. His hand wrapped around a broom handle, and then he headed back to his room. Step, step, step. His heart was in his throat, and it pounded there. His eyes were wide. He could hear the 2 women talking in his room. Arguing was more like it. "This is your fault." "I don't know what you did, but you did something. We should be facing Kami right now, but no." "No, we're not, and I know I did my part correctly," the first voice said with abundant snark. "Kami? My Hylerum character? Are they from the game company? Did they find out about my black market dev kit?" Albert's panic became very, very different. Fines for software modification were hefty, and neither he nor his mother could afford it. It was not enough to make him lower his broomstick, but it did make him less afraid that violent meth heads had broken in somehow. He raised the broom up, clutching it at the base just above where the bristles connected. "Me? You always blame me? I'm powerful, sure, but even I can't take both of us out of there to somewhere else. If I had screwed up, it would just be me here now." "So something else must have gone wrong," the second voice said, just as his hand reached for the brass cylindrical knob of his door. Albert counted out in his mind, preparing to burst into the room. "All right, on 3. 1, he thought, and took a breath. 2, he thought, and exhaled deeply and in silence. "Yo!" He heard them blame each other again. 3! He took another deep breath, wrenched the knob, and burst into the room with the cracked shout of the sort that only a teenage boy could make, waving the broom handle high like he was going to bring it down on the head of whoever was in reach. Twin shrieks of alarm reached him in turn as the pair scrambled back in shock, pressing themselves against the wall. Albert's shout became something else almost immediately. A shout of fear and confusion brought on by the unexpected. From what he'd heard, he expected 2 women. What kind of women? Anything from executives who had waltzed in to demand his console be turned over, to druggies hoping to rob him, either of which would have been a thing to shout over. What he got presented before his eyes brought another shout, "What the hell are you?" On its face, the question was stupid, because what they were was obvious. He'd seen their sort many times in fictions and games, but never before had he seen them in life. Any teenage boy or grown man or person with eyes to see would have called them beautiful. with long, slender legs and arms, classical hourglass shapes with oval faces and long hair, one blonde, the other inky black. Their features seemed quite delicate, and would have raised alarm in no one if anything by themselves. Attraction and protective instinct would be naturally expected. But it was their other features that brought alarm. On the left, the inky black-haired woman had a pair of horns growing from the sides of her head, while black bat-like wings sprang from her back, and her flesh was a bloody red. Her counterpart, a more conventional skin tone that you'd call lightly tanned. Her hair was long and golden, tumbling down behind her. However, from her back sprung wings of white feathers. An angel and a demoness, and they were in his home. "What are you?" he shouted again, and the pair, dumbstruck by the unexpected confrontation, had terror-filled eyes of their own, as if he was the monster. Albert waved the broom over his head, clutching it tight with both hands. "How did you get in here?" He shouted the question, and the pair of unexpected entries did something else he never expected, other than exist, which was strange enough. Their knees grew weak, they collapsed to the floor, and they began to let out a wailing, keening cry as if they'd come upon the corpse of a loved one. "It can't be! It can't be! It can't be!" The angel wept, while the demoness could not even manage words. Albert slowly began to lower his improvised weapon. His fear ebbed away like the tide going out, and the obvious set in for more than one reason. Something is very, very wrong here. It may be them, it may be me, it may be both, but something is. And for the moment he could only wonder what it was. Chapter 2. The danger sense that was going off like a fire alarm in his head moments ago stopped as quickly as it began. The wailing of the two women was painful and grating to his ears, but worse than that was the despondency on their faces. The fact that they'd more or less broken into his home was no longer relevant in his mind. The way they knelt and keened toward the ceiling showed the most unutterable depths of despair that he'd ever seen outside of a mirror. Albert set the broom aside at the wall. It slid down and fell to the carpeted floor with a thud that was drowned out by their cries. The fact that they were creatures out of mythology and fantasy, or worse, or maybe better, out of some anime series, was less relevant at the moment. A thudding from upstairs began, which brought them up short. "Hey, keep it down, brat!" his upstairs neighbor shouted and stomped on the floor several times. The pair of women were caught off guard by the sudden noise, so much so that their faces froze. Albert took advantage of that in an instant to crouch down in front of them. He held a finger up to his lips and whispered, "Shh." Foreign as they were, they understood the request to be quiet. Though with the noise above stopped, little choked sobs began again. I'm not quite sure what to say here. I really don't know where to begin," Albert said. Their eyes were full of tears through which they stared at him. So luminous and bright they were that he looked away, unable to bear what he saw in them. You would think my years of video games and anime would prepare me for this sort of thing, but no. No, it definitely did not. He looked sideways at them with a fragile, shaky smile, though they clearly didn't understand. If he read their pursed lips and curious eyes right, they returned his smile with ones of their own. "So, I guess names?" "Yes, names first. My name is Albert Baptiste Lamarck." Albert Baptiste Lamarck?" the pair repeated. He shook his head and his hand back and forth in front of the space between them. No, just Albert Baptiste Lamarck." I see. The angel said, "I am Liala." She then put her hand on the demon's shoulder, "And this is Raziel." "Right, so, Liala, Raziel, no family names?" he asked. "Camilla," they said at once, and that at least brought a smile to their faces. Albert flopped backwards, catching himself on the carpet when his hands thrust back behind him. "Okay. One of you is adopted, I assume?" They shook their heads, and Liala was the one to explain. "The name comes from the training house where we prepared for—" "For?" Albert asked. She trailed off and looked away. Taking some of her long blonde hair, she fidgeted with the locks, winding her finger around them over and over again. Raziel thrust her sharp-looking red finger down at the floor between them. "This, which we failed." She grimaced enough to bare sharp fangs, and then the angry look faded to one of woe again. "We failed!" Her back arched, and she looked up to the ceiling. "By the Lord of the Undead, we failed!" Both of their sets of wings were shaking, and Albert felt a rush of panic that they would begin that keening wail again. "Wait! Failed at what? What were you trying to do exactly? Maybe there is some way to fix it." he urged in a rushed, hoarse voice, going up to his knees and curling his legs under him. In a bold gesture, he grabbed both of them at the shoulder. That brought them around for a moment, and their faces met him again. The demon woman had bright, sparkling ruby eyes, while the eyes of the angel were a brilliant sapphire blue. "You're not dead after all, so there's still something, maybe?" Owlbear faltered a little, but flailing for something to say, it was the best he could do. The pair traded looks. "Do you know Kami?" Liala asked in a hopeful voice as smooth as silk. "Oh, boy." Owlbear moaned and ran a hand through his sandy hair. They cocked their heads at him. "Well?" they asked at once. Owlbear fumbled for words. "Do you have video games where you come from?" he asked as delicately as he could. "We have games," Raziel replied, her dark eyebrows furrowed. "But that doesn't sound like you mean what we do." "It's easier to show you, I think," Owlbear replied, and grunted a little when he stood up. He went to the television, which had gone into power save mode, and swept his hand across the base of the screen to power it back on. The music picked up again, and the pair stared at it in disbelief. "Where are the musicians?" Raziel asked. She pointed up. "It doesn't sound like it's coming from up there." She focused her eyes on the television. "And that is a weird— Wait, that isn't a window." She snapped her mouth shut, but Liala was already quiet and watching with fascination. Owlbear seated himself in front of the screen and scrolled to the character Kami. "Is this who you were looking for?" he asked and pointed at the screen. "Yes!" they exclaimed at once and clapped their hands together. "Now, if we can just get him," Liala said with joy. "Go ahead, summon him. I don't know how we ended up here, but maybe if he's a summoned being instead, well, that should still do." "All right, I'll summon him," Owlbear said, and he felt Raziel staring at the back of his head. She picked up on his tone and that something was amiss in all this, even if Liala had not. He tapped the green button on his controller, and the scene shifted, as did the music. Owlbear made the character go into third person and began to move him across the screen. "That is Kami. He's just a character in my story. He's not a summon to the real world. Just lines of code expressed as a visual for me to play with. He's not real fiction. Fantasy," Owlbear said as gently as he could, then set down the controller and turned to face them both again. Raziel gave a little nod. "That explains it. That's why we failed. That is why the spell rebounded and brought us here." "What?" Liala asked, scratching her head. She looked over to the demoness beside her. "You can't summon fictions, Liala. You just can't. If we could do that, we'd solve our problems just by making up heroic stories every year and recycling old plots with new names and descriptions. But we can't. Even a normal summon might do. But when they're not real at all," she shrugged her shoulders, spreading her arms and wings out as she did so. "There's nothing there." Liala whispered, and her bright blue eyes were blurred by tears again. "Then we really did fail." Owlbear picked up on the meaning behind their exchange. Thank goodness for all the anime isekai shows I watched. Owlbear thought with a mental sigh of relief to go with it. "Wait, so if we didn't actually get the hero we wanted, then we can just go back home again." Liala brightened, and then so did Raziel. The pair stood up and almost synchronized. They interlocked their hands and stretched out. "I hate to be rude and just leave," Raziel said with a smile, "especially after you've been nice to us, but we have work to do." Liala's wings fluttered a little, and she even blushed a faint rose shade on her cheeks. "Right, work. I'm so sorry, Owlbear. We didn't mean to intrude." "Ah, okay, this is something I'll never forget, but always doubt happened. Now, since you're leaving anyway," he gave a bold smile to them both, "you're the prettiest guests I've ever had." "You are a nice whatever you are, aren't you?" Liala said with a demure little smile in return. She then tightened her hand in that of the demon. "Thanks a lot for the explanation, Owlbear, and, have a nice life," Raziel said with a fangy smile that felt friendlier than it looked. They then raised their hands overhead and spouted off a series of syllables that Owlbear couldn't follow. And nothing happened. The pair looked at him, each other, and with their arms still raised straight overhead, they repeated the syllables. Again, nothing happened. Owlbear simply watched and waited. They did it again. Nothing happened. Their arms tensed. Raziel found Owlbear's eyes. "You wouldn't happen to be a supremely powerful sorcerer using barrier or nullification magic right now, would you, Owlbear?" "No," he said with a decisive shake of his head. "What about magic items enchanting your home against travel spells?" Liala asked hopefully. "If I had that, you probably wouldn't have gotten in here in the first place," Owlbear replied, and the pair gave quiet nods of agreement at that one. "Then why isn't it working?" Raziel asked him. I'm not sure what is supposed to happen right now, Albert replied and took a step away from them. But if I had to guess... They let go of one another and bent forward at the waist to look at him more closely with intense, hopeful expressions. Their lips pursed, their eyes brimming with expectation, they addressed him together. Yes? Then I'd say it's a lobster trap situation, Albert suggested. A what now? Liala asked. Raziel's face began to darken at the suggestion of a trap, even one she didn't recognize. And Albert held up his hands with palms facing her to settle them down, then backed away another step. Lobster, it's a kind of crustacean, an animal that lives on the bottom of our oceans. Traps for them are wire mesh cages. There's a hole they go through to get its bait placed inside, but once they're in, they just can't get back out. Albert proposed, and Raziel's darkening face was unchanged. Who would do that? Raziel demanded, her fingers closed into fists, but her hostility at Albert dissipated with his evident helpfulness. Maybe no one, Albert said, and started to relax. Look, Magic, I guess it is a thing in your world, so you were able to use it to travel, even if you didn't mean to. That got you here. He thrust a finger down at his carpeted floor. But magic does not exist in this world. So that means we're stuck? Liala gasped, and her hand darted up to her mouth. Maybe? Albert rubbed his chin and thought about it. Maybe, I mean, that was just an analogy. You got to this side and can't get back, but maybe somebody on the other side could pull you through. How should I know what magic can do? Wait, I want to try something, Raziel interjected. She held out her hand and concentrated. She squeezed her eyes shut and began to growl like she was pushing some horrible weight. Then in her hand, there appeared a simple little black sphere the size of a ping-pong ball. So that works, Raziel said and glanced at her companion. Try yours. Liala did the same, and after several seconds of concentration, a little white sphere appeared in her palm as well. Internal magic works fine, Raziel thought out loud and looked back over to Albert. Show us yours. I told you that's not a thing here. Albert crossed his arms. Beautiful or not, strange as it was, he felt annoyance building up. Don't be ridiculous. How else could that thing work? Pictures don't move and... Raziel snapped her mouth shut when he started to laugh. What's so funny? She demanded with a grimace. It's not real? It's not moving by magic. These are just digital renderings. In this world, we use science to do things, Albert explained. Sounds like another word for magic, Raziel retorted and put her hands on her hips, closing her fingers around the little black ball. Magic is just what people call stuff they don't understand until science figures it out, Albert retorted. Then use your science to send us home. Can you do that? Liala asked and folded her hands together as if in prayer. Please, whatever you are, people are depending on us, if you can, but if you don't, so many will die. The angel was clearly growing agitated. Her wings shook, her fingers shook, the hands which clung together moved to cover her mouth, and her sapphire eyes were blinking rapidly as she fought against tears. Can you do that? Raziel pressed, and as naturally as if she'd done it 1,000 times, she put an arm around Liala and pulled her close and enfolded the angel in her arms. I can't, Albert answered, his annoyance fading as their desperation and emotion mounted. Raziel didn't look away as Liala shut her eyes. You can't or you won't, Raziel snapped. I can't. Albert spread his arms open and shrugged. First of all, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a student. I haven't gone to learn any of the sort of science that would be needed to address even the possibility of getting you home. I'm something of a nerd, so I know enough to know the existence of other dimensions. Where other natural laws exist is at least considered. But the science to even test that, let alone create a travel path. No, that's not even on the drawing board, explored yet. A student? Raziel asked. She squinted at him. Yes, I'm in high school. Albert replied, I still live here with my mother. I don't have the slightest idea what to do about sending you home. Could you take us to your scientists, maybe? Perhaps they could help us. Liala half whimpered it as if it were a plea. Albert went to his tan wooden desk, pulled out a chair, and sat down heavily, causing it to creak under him. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Raziel asked, sensing his reticence. Because you two don't exist here, Albert replied. We're very real, Raziel retorted with a little frown made from her dark lips. All right, Albert put a hand to his chest. I'm a human being. We're the dominant species on this planet, apex predators. Really? Not orcs or demons or angels or... Raziel was about to list off too many things for him to go over, so he cut her off. None of those are real. This planet has only humans as intelligent, civilized creatures. There were others once, but the last evidently intelligent species similar to us died off 12,000 years ago on their last little home when a volcano erupted. The other species, we drove them all to extinction over the course of thousands and thousands of years. There are no orcs, angels, demons, goblins, trolls, or anything else. Those exist only in our mythologies and fictions. Albert explained it as gently as he could and then put his hands in his lap, clasping his fingers into an interlocked position and shifting uncomfortably. You don't exist here at all. You never did. If I took you to scientists of any sort, you'll spend your lives being subjected to all kinds of experiments. You'll both be prisoners, and our governments will exploit you like a resource. Raziel hissed like an angry cat. I'd never allow that to happen to us. Albert shook his head. We're not apex predators for nothing. We're a species built for war and predation. We do a lot of great things. But trust me, you won't be happy with the outcome if I do what you're asking me to do. If humans are so bad, why aren't you doing what you say will happen to us? Liala asked in a quiet little voice. Because I don't like people, so I don't want to be like people. He snorted with contempt. So? Raziel swallowed. What happens now? Albert put a hand on the desk at which he sat and began to drum his fingers over it. I have question about where you're from, but that can wait, I guess. He clenched his other hand into a fist. Unutterable despair began to form on their faces again, and their fear, their sense of isolation, was clearly growing by leaps and bounds as their lives hung by a thread and his hands seemed to hold the shears. I can't just throw them out, he realized, and he made a decision. My mother works very late and sleeps a lot. She's away right now for a while. So, I don't want to send you out into my world ignorant and alone. That won't end well for you. I guess you could stay with me for now at least. Maybe people where you're from can call you back home, right? Right. Thank you, Albert Baptiste Lamarck, Raziel replied. Thank you, Albert Baptiste Lamarck, Liala added. Just call me Albert, that's easier, he said and stood up. Albert, then, the pair affirmed. Let me get some sleeping bags for you. You won't have to worry about my mother. She completely respects my privacy and never comes into my room. There's only one rule in here, other than not bothering the neighbors. He thrust his hand out, pointing to the door behind him. Out that door is a hall. At the far end is another room. That is my mother's bedroom, and under no circumstances are you ever to go in there. She needs all the rest she can get, and I doubt she'd handle you two very well. Myths don't often spring to life in front of you, okay? Albert asked. Though he tried to be light-hearted, the steel in his voice was uncompromising in the extreme. The pair nodded. Of course we understand, they said, and nodded again for emphasis. Good. He relaxed. It'll be getting late soon, so I'll get you some sleeping bags and extra pillows. You can at least be comfortable. Thank you, they said again as he showed his back and left the room. They bent forward at the waist, bowing deeply to their unexpected host and wondering, what do we do now?